sort of moving on now more towards obviously the fact you're both Northern football correspondents for your respective national newspapers, and obviously you must. Well, you obviously regularly attend games at Old Trafford. I was wondering, do you ever, sort of from a journalist perspective, is it helpful or insightful for you at all to read, say, blogs or fanzines, which provide a more, obviously, independent viewpoint?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I spend all my time reading, because I think you can be bogged down by too much opinion, but it's good to have a feel for what the fans are thinking. I mean, you get that anyway, because Twitter's kind of a diluted version of that. It kind of gives you a snap idea what they're thinking. But I mean, it was great to get by Andy, to be stand to get Edward's first interview. So we all went through that and looked at that. Certainly kept impressed with that one. And it is quite good to see what the fans are thinking, because the fans are guys that will put the pressure. It seems to be wrong. It's the fans that are the first ones to go. The fans start turning on the manager or the owner, and that's a turning point. So you have to keep an idea of what the fans think to obsess what they're thinking. Because some fans can be a bit one-eyed at times and not see through the picture, so you have to be mindful of that.
Well, some people think that, fanzines, for example, have always been important, or certainly as far as I'm concerned, have always been important. And blogs and online columns are essentially just an electronic version of fanzines in my eyes. Which makes them valid. I think it's important that you read the right ones. There are some out there that contain really quite intelligent writing, also information, bits of information. Some of the older school probably think that fanzines and online blogs are just kind of rantings and kind of one-eyed madmen. And I'm sure that there must be some that are, but most aren't, and therefore have a purpose. Twitter is the same. We get a lot of stick on Twitter, but that's fine, because once you kind of wade through that and ignore all that for what it is, which is nonsense, you do actually also find Manchester United fans and fans of lots of other clubs on Twitter who actually have some really valid points to make. And I now know which ones I want to follow on Twitter. I know the ones who will have a debate, a conversation with you, and maybe make you see something differently, rather than just think they're clever because they can call you a name. So, in answer to your question, I think they are valid, and I think it's great these days that you have kind of different ways to get fans' opinions. Twitter being the most recent of those, I suppose.
And would you mind, obviously, in terms of United outlets, is there any in particular that you do look out for? Like in terms of online blogs or fanzines, is there any that you would read more regularly than others?
I mean, there's the main three fanzines: Red News, Red Issue, and To Be Stand. I think beyond that, because like I say, if you spend so much time looking at blogs, you're not doing that job yourself, actually trying to get something to paper. So, like I say, you have to keep an eye on what people are thinking, but without becoming with that yourself. You read on blogs and trying to understand it.
Yeah. I think if there are bloggers out there who think they're not being read or think they're not being appreciated, and I'm sure there are many, because you can't read them all. If there are people who want to kind of get their views drawn, or if they want to draw attention to what they're doing, Twitter's the best way to do it. To send one of us or anyone a message with a Twitter link is a very, very quick way to get someone's eye drawn to something, because you might be on a train or sitting in the press box before a game or sitting in a press conference room. And we're always on Twitter all the time, so if people want their blogs read, the best way to do it, I think, is to send them as links, and then they've got a better chance.
And you both obviously alluded to Twitter there. What's the funniest or most peculiar tweet either of you have ever received?
Does that have to be clean?
Not necessarily, no. Any unusual propositions or I don't know.
I'm not going to make any specific tweets, but it's when people start setting up copycat Twitter accounts, kind of random Twitter accounts by 60 fans of United fans with me pretending to be somebody else, and they're quite funny. There's a couple of ones.
Yeah, I haven't reached that level of kind of infamy yet to have a parody account set up, which when you think of my surname, I'm quite surprised that I haven't. But there you go. There was an Oggy one for a while, which was quite funny, but I was very disappointed to see that it faded away after 6 or 7 weeks because the bloke sitting next to me wasn't that comfortable with it. But in terms of propositions, I'm struggling. I must admit, I'm struggling to think of one at the moment. I might have to come back to you on that, to be honest. But there are, to be honest, without wishing to kind of blow smoke up the backside of United fans, I do find that United fans, by and large, are among the more kind of grown up on Twitter. There are fans of other clubs in the country who are not. It's a sweeping generalisation, obviously, but there are some who don't always take criticism as well as they might. But some of the guys on Twitter that I find most amusing, and girls on Twitter that I find most amusing and insightful, I have to say, are from the red half of Manchester. Whether that's just because they're a bit more chilled out because they've won things for so many years, I don't know. But certainly some of the guys who I follow who give me quite a lot of amusement and food for thought who tend to be United fans. That might be a coincidence, it might not.
Okay, and do you happen to follow any of the kind of managerial parody accounts or the players? Because there are a few amusing ones out there. I think there's an Arsene Wenger one which I find particularly amusing.
The James Milner one's the best. Boring James Milner.
Yeah. Talks a lot about Asda, going shopping at Asda.
There's nothing boring about going shopping at Asda. That one, the Evil Kagawa one is very funny. The big Sam Allardyce one, who's gold dust if people haven't seen that one. The key to those, as we know, is that they've got to be spot on to work. And the boring James Milner one and the Kagawa one and the big Sam one have got it off to a T, I have to say. You usually find that the ones that haven't quite got it, you just can't get the right tone, they tend to fade away with about 6 followers after a while.
It's frustrating that the real ones, that just don't use them for anything worthwhile other than just tweet random tweets. I mean, Rio and Rooney could be so much better with their tweets if they actually put something out there. Real good to be fair. I mean, I think Wayne's Twitter page is a little bit common. Neville's really good on Twitter. I just think Jan Piotr is the guy who's based in Germany, used to play in England. You just need players to use their expertise a little bit and put it on Twitter. In terms of players that are playing now, there aren't many of them. I can't stand Joe Barton, so he's listening to Joe Barton. That's the point of Joe Barton. But somebody less mad and mental than Joe Barton.
The thing about Twitter is that I think a lot of people just presume that journalists are too up themselves or too arrogant or too scared or whatever to kind of engage on Twitter, and that's totally not the case. Twitter, I've been on Twitter before, just before the last World Cup. I've been on Twitter. Mark's gone slightly longer, and Twitter's evolved quite a lot in that time. Obviously everybody was mad for it at the start, and we all tweeted probably a lot more than we do now. But I think it's actually moved into a better place now, where you develop a thick skin, so you ignore the people who are just out there to try and antagonise you, and you engage with the people who you think are worth talking to. And there are lots of those out there. So I still think sometimes there's a perception that journalists are only interested in advertising their own opinions on Twitter and don't want to engage. I'm sure people think that about the actual footballers themselves as well. But I don't think that actually applies to either. And I think that if the conversation is rational and sensible and even better funny, then you'll get response, because journalists do spend a lot of time with time on their hands, travelling, sitting around waiting for things to start, and Twitter is a great way to fill that time.
Absolutely.
Mark was gone for a drink. I think he's got a bit bored of what I was talking about.
Well, I was going to ask. I'll sort of ask Mark as well when he returns. I remember when I originally interviewed you for it went into United We Stand part of the interview. I remember we discussed at sort of some length really the fact that obviously you journalists are granted access behind the scenes that obviously most fans aren't privy to. And we discussed at length the kind of facilities at Old Trafford and how they compare to.
I've got
That's all right. and how it compares to sort of facilities at other, Premier League grounds, presumably more around the north that you frequent.
What, United? What facilities?
Yeah.
Yeah, look, we get looked after everywhere we go these days. I mean, the facilities in press rooms and press boxes are far greater than they were 10 years ago. United's press room and press box are perfectly well equipped. We all get fed, we get car parking these days. It's really difficult to complain. We do complain because journalists just complain. It's part of our nature, so we do complain. But we shouldn't really about that. We get the best seats in the house wherever we go these days. There's certain regulations obviously laid down by the Premier League and by UEFA in Champions League fixtures that determine that we've got good viewing areas, and we get certain facilities, we get Wi-Fi and the rest of it. We don't. Some of us actually, probably some of us who've been around a bit longer, we'd probably give some of that back. In fact, I would definitely give some of that back if I could regain some of the access to players and managers that I had 15 years ago. I don't really care whether I get fed at Manchester United. Obviously, if it's there, I'll eat it. But I don't go there. I don't go to Manchester United for my lunch. I go there to work, and I'd quite happily give some of that back if we could maybe get a bit more access to players. In the old days, you used to stand in the car park and wait for them to come out. If they wanted to talk, they would. And if they didn't, they wouldn't. These days, you've got to go through press officers, and you can't actually physically get to the players like we used to. So we'd all like a bit more of that. But in terms of the way we get looked after at Manchester United, it stands up in comparison to any team in the Premier League, I have to say.
It's a fair point about the players because when you actually speak to players, they're great. They don't work hard to do things, but there are so many barriers between you and players nowadays. They don't speak to, but when you do, you've got problems whatsoever. So more access to players would be a better.
I suppose the obvious question some United fans or probably City fans would want to know is, do you ever get served prawn sandwiches at Old Trafford?
We get
a nice selection.
We get a peculiar selection of sandwiches at Old Trafford at half time. Actually, you certainly never leave Old Trafford complaining of being underfed. I'm not sure what goes in some of those sandwiches at half time. I certainly used to wonder what went in them when Alex Ferguson was the manager. But prawns, not sure. Not sure they want to waste prawns on us, to be perfectly honest. We get egg mayonnaise and ham and tomato, really. The kind of old-fashioned northern fare.
Lovely. Okay, sort of moving on. You touched upon it before. You mentioned potentially that you were willing to discuss players at United that might not be, in inverted commas, United calibre, or might not be the right players to take the club forward. Would you be willing to specify which players you think in the current squad aren't potentially?
Well, without wishing to kind of dig out players for the sake of it, I suppose the best way to do an exercise like this is to ask how many of United players would get into other top 4 teams, or how many would get in Chelsea's team, how many would get in Man City's team, and therefore off the top of my head you would ask yourself I would ask myself whether Tom Cleverley would get in another top 4 team, whether Ashley Young would get in another top 4 team, whether Chris Smalling would get in another top 4 team, Nani, for example. There's maybe 4 there. There are others who would probably maybe have a bit of work to do, but show signs that you can do it. And I suppose you talk about Raphael, you talk about Evans, you talk about Jones. I still think Kagawa is a good player. I still think Valencia has things to offer. Obviously, we all know how excited everyone is about Yanizai. So there are players in the category of, they might get straight into Man City's team now or Chelsea's team now, but they might in a couple of years. So you don't want to give up on those players. But I do sometimes look through that squad, and I did when Alex Ferguson was in charge, because he put it together. I do look through that squad sometimes and think, well, you know what? Some of these players look a little bit light, and I have to say that people like Cleverley and Smalling haven't really trained on to the level that you would hope that they might have trained on, and you do get to a point where you have to ask yourself if they will. if they will.
The one thing I think is right in a lot of names you mentioned, but I think if United had 3 or 4 top quality additions to the squad, it would bring those players on. It would make the Swans and Cleverleys and Nanny's better players. You've got the lacking are the strong characters, the kind of Cantona, the Hughes, the big characters in the dressing room, the Roy Keane that will just automatically generate 10% of their team. I think that's what's lacking. If Michael Carrick, to the person, he's United on the field, but he's not a fulsome personality that will inspire players to perform better. I think that one of the things that shows how far United have fallen in the last 15 plus is the treble again. It doesn't really feel the treble. Keane, Beckham, Bull, Scholes, Giggs. Michael Carrick will get in that, but Michael Carrick in the United best midfield for 15 years ago, United the best team they remember it. Midfield. So does that reflect the fall in quality of the midfield? I think it reflects more general. I think it's more general than it's the gradual decline. It's a great basketball. I just think great players make better players play better. Look at Luke and Suarez, how he inspires Sturridge to play with better. Gerrard plays around Henderson to be better. If you actually get 3 old players like calibre, then it will have an effect, but clearly the squad will be light on centre halves because Rio and Vidic haven't the year left in.
But then it hasn't necessarily had the effect. There's 2 players that there are 2 players that we haven't mentioned, 2 centre forwards that we haven't mentioned, Welbeck and Hernandez. Has the presence of Robin van Persie brought anything more out of Danny Welbeck and Ave Hernandez? Just to continue your point, Bobby. And I'm not sure that it has really. I mean, we all like Danny. He's a nice lad. He's talented, but again, he's got to a point now where he looks like he's got a little bit stuck. Hernandez is a remarkable individual. He's been at the club for what? 4 years. He's the same player now that he was when he arrived. He hasn't changed. He still doesn't understand what offside is. He still has a remarkable ability to poach goals, which is clearly instinctive. And you'll never get rid of that. But he's not improved as a player. As a general footballer, he hasn't improved, and he hasn't. He's no closer to being a starting player in that team now than he was at the start. So you could argue that they've had the presence of Wayne Rooney and Robin van Persie around them, but they haven't necessarily improved like you say people in midfield might have if Roy Keane had been there. So sometimes it's up to the player. You can't wait for other senior players to drag it out of you. You just get to get better. And maybe the upshot of all that is that you just have to conclude that although they're all very, very good Premier League players, they're just not quite good enough to be players in a team that has aspirations of winning the league.
I agree with that. I'm not sure the sort of players will go around and spend time giving advice. So well, I think it's quite self-focused individual. Certain players have that ability to bring other players on and much of players. You're right about the strikers. I mean, even something like a game, 5 or 6 you could question whether United's ultimate has been good enough because a lot of players are still scripted, strolling, young,
Laughing a little bit. But you are.
Jones hasn't really come on. Raphael still getting match with his defence. So, but yeah, progressed, but not to the extent he hoped.
I mean, I get all kinds of abuse from United fans about Hernandez. It's a bit of a hobby horse of mine. In that we've got into great players, He's not, is he? How can he be a great player? He's not in the team for a start. Great players demand to be picked. Hernandez remains to me a very, very good substitute.
It's a guy that's a great person. Obviously, the other thing as well is really good. Yeah, that head problem very good. So nobody had quite whether it was, whether there's more to it than met the eye, but he certainly kicks on. But it was just a great to see, like a lot of players do, fall away. Could become he definitely had it. So he's going to
And you sort of mentioned Tom Cleverley there. Obviously, it was quite well noted that he had an interview in the press in which he disclosed that he perceived himself to be being scapegoated, I suppose. How do you felt he chose to go about that situation in terms of sort of addressing it publicly in the media?
Well, first of all, you made a scapegoat. I think if you had to listen to the rap players that made a scapegoat, I think you could roll down it. Particularly blame time. I mean, you can't blame the guy who wants to speak. You know, if someone wants to speak to somebody press about it, fair play. I'm not going to start criticising the players speaking to the media. You can't blame who Lloyd Hull did in the mirror. Ollie's not going to turn that down. If the Man United player wants to open his heart, then fine, you know. We shouldn't criticise the players on terms for sort of like that. My fear was that I think he distanced himself a little bit by saying, don't blame me. First of all, nobody was blaming Tom Cleverley. Secondly, if you say don't blame me, it's almost like blame somebody else. So it made it a little bit ill-advised in that respect.
Well, he's right. It's a bit rich for us to sit here and criticise players for talking to us, but I will on this occasion. As soon as I saw that interview, I just thought, the first thing I thought was bad idea, Tom Cleverley. Because if you're a Man United player and you want to be a Man United player, things aren't going well, you just play and you make sure you play well enough until things are going well. And then maybe you might do an interview saying, oh, all those people who doubted me, well, I'm doing it. There was a time, Tom Cleverley's not the only United player in the world who's been criticised. There were times, time flies, but maybe 7, 8 years ago when people were criticising Ryan Giggs. I remember Ryan Giggs getting booed by the Stretford end when people thought he might want to go to Italy or he'd lost his game or whatever. Ryan Giggs didn't go moaning and gloating about it. He probably did in the dressing room, he probably did at home. He just got on with it. I'm afraid if you're Man United player and things aren't going well, you just need to be a big boy about it and make sure that you play your way through it and prove people wrong by what you did. You don't go moaning and whining and saying, oh, people are picking on me, it's not fair, it's not my fault. I tell you what, that would have gone down like a leather in that dressing room. Gary Neville is still in that dressing room. Don't think Tom Cleverley's feet would have touched the ground for a second.
I'm not sure which one Tom has replaced.
Tom's a nice lad. We both met Tom. We've met Tom kind of socially on one occasion, and he's a really, really nice fella. And he's not without ability either. But I just think he made a bad couple.
Maybe bad noise, maybe people did the wrong. It wouldn't have been Tom's idea. It would have been people that look after him. Maybe naive. Thought it would have
Yeah, and just one that sort of piqued the interest of all Reds, I suppose, is the kind of Wilfried Zaha mystery this year. What's your kind of take on that? And do you believe that he will be given a chance to shine at Old Trafford?
Tell you what, anyone who wants to understand Wilfried Zaha should go and get a copy of yesterday's newspapers and turn to the bit where it details what happened at Cardiff against Hull on Saturday. And you will notice that in a 4-0 home defeat, Zaha was taken off at half time. So I think that probably sums up the mysteries and the issues around Wilfried Zaha. Talented player, but talk to anyone in football, maybe apart from the people who decide to buy him, talk to anyone in football and they will say, not sure whether he's really got the ability to focus, not sure whether he can really cope with the demand of what it takes to be at a big football club. At the moment, at the moment, he's still a young player. But the reason that Zaha didn't get any game time in the first half of the season from David Moyes was that David Moyes just didn't see anything on the training ground that made him to think that Wilfried Zaha was ready mentally or in terms of his football to play. And I think his contribution, if you can call it that, since Cardiff, proves that. I spoke to a manager at another club early in the season who was linked with Zaha on loan and said to him, "Oh, you're going to take him in January." I said, "Well, I was thinking about it, but I spoke to somebody United and they told me not to go anywhere near him." So, that's only opinion. It's only opinion. I'm sure Wilfried Zaha would claim the opposite. I'm sure the people who work for him, who work around him, would claim the opposite. But again, if Wilfried Zaha wants to be Man United football, he's just got to get his boots on and prove that he's good enough. Certain things in football don't change. If you're good enough, then you'll play.
I think you'll see the United shirt again. I just don't think Moyes will trust him. He doesn't trust him. He doesn't think he's disciplined enough on or off the pitch. And I just think if he can sell him this summer, I think he will be. I just don't think there's an help. I know he's young, he's got potential, but I just just got to see David Moyes suddenly deciding in the summer or beyond that he's got a future.
You know, there are fundamentals when it comes to being a professional footballer, and this is whether you play for, it doesn't matter whether you play for Manchester United or Chesterfield or Derby County. There are certain fundamentals, and there are things like timekeeping, professionalism, attitude, the way you speak to senior players. I'm afraid it's like football. The football training ground is like any other workplace. It's got its pecking order, certain ways that you have to behave. Just because you happen to be quite talented doesn't mean that you can behave in a different way. Until Wilfred realises that, which he might, until he realises that, and realises that he's just another player amongst a group of very good players, then I don't think he'll see it in the United shirt. And by the looks of what happened at the weekend, I'm not sure what's in the Cardiff shirt for a while either.
Right. Now it's interesting you sort of provide that viewpoint, because sort of any Palace fan I've ever interacted with are just astounded, because in their sort of perspective, he almost single-handedly dragged them back into the Premier League. So I think they're dumbfounded.
Crystal Palace Championship is a totally different environment. I mean, Crystal Palace fans have never seen a decent place since they've arrived. Without being brutal, if Crystal Palace is the Championship, it's a different environment. It's not money.
But also, if you speak to anyone who worked at Crystal Palace or who was in that dressing room with Wilf at Crystal Palace, and they might say to you, yeah, really, really talented footballer, but there's some other bits and pieces that we weren't so sure about. So, you know, I don't never like to write young players off. I mean, how old is he? 21 or so. I don't like to write young players off. I won't, because, you know, we saw him on pre-season when he did play, very nice. You know, he's really. He's certainly got, you know, he's got a trick, he's got pace, you know, he gets his head up well to score goals. But like you say, there's another side to being a professional footballer. If he gets to grips with that side of it, then who knows?
Well, just a couple more, because I'm mindful of the time and I appreciate all the time you've given already. This one is a bit more hypothetical. It sort of requires an imaginative leap of faith as such. I think you touched upon it before a little bit, Mark, when you said that the squad lacks characters such as, say, a Hughes or someone with real presence. So say, for example, you're appointed as David Moyes' assistant manager, and you're able to bring back any 3 ex-United players at their peak into the current squad. Who would you choose and why?
Don't say Russell B as well.
Well, I mean, to be honest, I took Real Vidic back 10 years ago. Does that count or does that not count? Because I think,
well, yeah, I suppose so, yeah.
When those two go, you don't realise how good we were until we go. I mean, back in 2008 when he won the league and Premier League, they were the best defensive pairing in the country by a long way. I mean, Real had everything, had Pets, the ball out in the past. Vidic was the warrior, and it was like Bruce and Palace had brought just on a different level. And I think replacing those two is going to be impossible. So I would say, turn the clock back 10 years, give yourself Real and Vidic again, and I think it's a classic goal. Brian Keane or Brian Robson thing, isn't it? And I think Brian Robson. Right.
Yeah, my answers will be a little bit obvious, I'm afraid, but you'd have to. I'd bring Keane back any day of the week. You know, I've watched football for many years, and I've still never seen anyone who can play. I've never seen a single player who can keep his levels as high as Keane did, even when others around him had lost all grip on theirs. Because let's not forget, you know, Manchester United had some difficult times under Keane, when Keane was playing as well. It wasn't always bed of roses, and whenever they struggled, Keane was a player who would just drag them up by the bootstraps. So I put him in there straight away. I would probably bring the goalkeeper back. I'd probably bring Schmeichel back. De Gea has done very well the last couple of seasons. You know, he got a lot of criticism from people like me when he first came. He's done terribly well, but he doesn't dominate his area. He doesn't dominate his defence like Schmeichel did. And nobody did, to be honest. So I'd bring him back. And then the other one would probably be slightly boring. I'd probably say someone like Dennis Irwin, because every great football team needs really good fullbacks. I know it's really boring. It's not a glamorous position, and you don't get many fullbacks winning World Player of the Year. But good fullbacks don't have to go a long way to making good football teams, and especially fullbacks who can take corners and free kicks. And he was kind of professional as Dennis was. So he's probably not going to win any kind of win any awards from most fanzines, but I'd take Owen as well.
No, he was Mr. Reliable, wasn't he? Known as Mr. Reliable, Dennis. He was brilliant. Okay, just lastly here, really, that obviously you'll be well aware that the kind of rumours regarding Robin van Persie that have surfaced in the last week or two. There was someone suggesting he might be going back to Arsenal in the summer. Some suggesting that at the Emirates he didn't appear massively content when he was playing. What's your kind of inkling there on that situation? I know he looked a bit better against Palace, but with regards to Van Persie, what's your kind of inkling?
No doubt that Van Persie's been moaning and groaning throughout the season. He was really, knocked onto his arse by the fact that Fergie left. He signed for Fergie and was really not so much that David Moyes replaced him, just that he left in the first place. So, but it's up to him to get over that. So he has been moaning and groaning, and there've been all kinds of, as you say, rumours swirling around all season really about him, especially when he was injured. That thigh injury was the longest running thigh injury known to man. However, if you talk to people at Arsenal and people who used to cover Arsenal, they'll say that he used to moan when he was at Arsenal as well. Some people say he was just one of those guys who's never happy unless he's unhappy, and he's just not a guy who's just going to walk into training every day and train and walk out again, like say Ryan Giggs. He's just not going to do that. It's just not the way he motivates himself, not the way he keeps himself going. So I think there's a bit of that about him as well. I don't think I'll ever see him go back to Arsenal, certainly not direct from Manchester United. It will be interesting to see what happens in the summer if United don't finish in the top four. Any world-class player who's playing at Premier League, especially a foreign player who finds themselves marooned outside the Champions League at the age of 30, you could argue he's got a right to question what to do, but at the same for me that means if he does it on his way.
I agree that he won't go back to Arsenal because unless you can take a pay cut, their wage structure doesn't fit from one person for any salary, so that's not going to happen. There was a really interesting quote from David Moyes last week, which especially when he signed the contract. He said, the one thing he's noticed since United is that Man United decide when players go. It's not the players that send Man United now. Whether that was a coded message to one person, I'm not sure, but it was a statement intent that nobody's leaving here unless we want it. Now, unless the person got some sort of scapegoat, his contract is not going to go, not because he got the Champions League, then let's see it go. Would anyone have considered when Van Persie signed the Champions League, would it even be in the contract? I don't think he could go. I see that this year he's not enjoying. He could never see last year. He could never get the goals last year. So he's had an inevitable kind of dip. But I think that Van Persie's 30 now. I think that he should be looking to get a world-class striker in the mid-20s. Maybe that's not going to be anything. Maybe still. But I think that you need a striker that can do what he did last year. I think he's a pace of Van Persie for that. Whether Van Persie may even be a season's man, I think that's not unlikely, but I do feel that he was a perfect man for last season. He got everything. He had to be paid. So whether he could be extended
And just a quick fire one really. If you had to sign, sort of pinpoint 2 or 3 players for United who they'd sign in the summer, who would you reckon?
Realistic ones or fantasy ones like Ronaldo?
No, more realistic, I'd say. Don't want to get up.
It's getting mentioned, but I don't know how realistic that is. I mean, this guy played Bayern Munich and was going to win so why would Bayern Munich? There's a suggestion that Bayern wants to make an example of one of their players.
Yeah.
They should. So that might force him. If he does, Real Madrid, Man City, PSG, and all going to look at Toni Kroos and they're in the Champions League. So
yeah.
Who would go for? It's something I don't know. I mean, I've not seen enough of the players in Europe to say him and him. I just think they need players in the mid-20s, in the prime, but playing well that fits, that can play second half, second midfield. That's
I've always had this little dream about Shrager Busquets in Man United. People tell me he's ridiculous, and it is ridiculous because you probably can't afford him, he probably wouldn't come. but I just think he's a sensational footballer. Someone who plays many times for Barcelona and for Spain to win as many things in that position. I think he's a beast of a man. He can play. He can pass the ball as well. Yeah, he likes to fall over, but he's not the only one. So the dream in the fantasy world maybe him. And this is a funny one really. It's just popped into my head now. It'd be really cool for this, but United can't seem to solve this left back issue with Edinburgh because you think he'd probably want to go and he's veins and Button's not good. I think will Ashley Cole come through you? Ashley Cole isn't in the Chelsea. He's in the Chelsea team. You obviously want to leave Chelsea. Get Ashley Cole for a couple of years as a little kind of bridge until he can identify a longer term prospect.
I think it's a shame to call him Tony Hibbert.
Well, no, lovely. Thank you very much for your time today, fellas. I really appreciate it. Obviously, if you want to, would you like to just specify your Twitter accounts, fellas? Just so, obviously, viewers want to follow you guys if they're not already.
Not any more followers or stalkers or abusers, so MLP Telegraph.
I don't know what mine is. I think it's Ian_Ladyman_DM.
That's
the Daily Mail. So,
yeah, that's the one. No, thank you for your time. It's been very enjoyable and very insightful. And hopefully maybe have you back on Stretty News TV again at some point in the future.
No problem, mate. Cheers.
Thanks. Have a good day out in Greece.
Bye, mate.
Cheers. Thank you.